Welcome to Dave and Dharm Demystify, a FinTech Futures podcast, helping make sense of the world of FinTech and digital finance. Please sit back and listen as the two Ds take a subject and discuss it to make it clearer and easier to understand.
Demystify.
Welcome to today's show. And today, joining us from Dubai is Murad from Global Ventures. Saeed, great to have you with us. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you do, your history, and a bit about Global Ventures as well?
Thank you, Dave. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you and Dharmesh. Thank you so much for hosting me. I'm Saeed Murad. I'm a senior partner at Global Ventures, which is a regional venture capital firm. We focus on deploying capital across the Middle East and Africa, predominantly around the Series A stage is where our sweet spot is. We are sector agnostic, but we've historically deployed with a little bit more affinity towards a few sectors where we've deployed more than others. FinTech is one of them. Digital health is another. We're seeing trends in supply chain technology and agri-tech as well. So we're excited by what the region presents. The region for us is the Middle East and Africa, but we are HQ'd in the UAE.
Fantastic. So I kind of wanted to jump straight in about the FinTech ecosystem and vibe actually in the GCC, but why don't we start with the UAE? I mean, I spent a lot of time over the last couple of years going in and out of Dubai, and I can feel this tremendous sense of energy and expectation around FinTech and the FinTech opportunity. So I just wanted to kind of get your perspective on that. I mean, the way I look at it is like Dubai has managed to kind of, out of almost nothing, create this incredible airport and this incredible airline. And, you know, I think now Dubai is the busiest international airport in the world. And that's sort of not come about by coincidence. It's kind of been there from a kind of planning point. When I think about FinTech, it feels like the pieces have been put in place around the whole of kind of the market and the way things are done. And yeah, so I just wanted to kind of get your perspective to kind of kick us off.
Sure. I like the anecdote that you brought up about the airport. And if we take a step back and you think through it, and I heard this through one of the gentlemen from the senior leadership of the country here at a government level, once mentioned this in a conference, and I thought it was fascinating. Dubai has continuously sort of reinvented itself from its early days in existence, and that's symbolic of what the UAE has done. So if we think through it, it started off as essentially a land port because of where it's geographically located. And so you had the flow of goods and products coming through the country, transitioning east to west or west to east. It's just very strategically located geographically. That then evolved into a seaport. And so there was the focus on developing the ports, the port of Jebel Ali, Port Rashid, Abu Dhabi, and so on. But the next iteration, the next wave came about in the 80s, where there was a focus to shift towards the airport. So Dubai Airport, the DXB as it's called, has turned into a mega hub. The focus to launch and execute on the strategy to build Emirates Airlines was critical. And it all informed each other. So the airport became one of the strongest. The airline is one of the most well-renowned globally. And they then started focusing on what next. And the idea was centered around talent, skill set, and capability. And so Dubai has now coined, or what I've heard coined, a term which is Brainport. Let's attract the best minds to come into the city here, centered in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Frankly, it's across the UAE. And to allow for the best business to be built from here, the most progressive environment and most conducive environment towards business growth, taking advantage of where you are geographically, but also what you're able to offer, what you're able to do, and that mentality of let's continuously excel, let's push, let's drive for the best, let's drive for, and strive for the absolute best in class. And so there's always been these sort of grand visions. The reality is, in my 18 years here, I've seen those visions come to life. We want to build the tallest building in the world. Done. We want to execute on 1, 2, 3. Done. Ambitious timelines, ambitious strategies, and delivery. So I've been very fortunate to witness it firsthand. And I will segue this into FinTech a little bit. What we've seen is a very progressive mindset towards everything that you need to allow for technological innovation to come in. And FinTech is no different. Traditional banking infrastructure has not been designed to allow for a low cost to serve across clients, whether that's GCC or whether that's the broader Middle East and Africa region, the remit across which Global Ventures invests. And solutions were never going to come through traditional banking. Because again, as I mentioned, the cost to serve for a traditional bank out of their branch will not allow for anyone to walk in and be immediately bankable. There are certain criteria, certain elements, certain commercials that need to make sense. Whereas when you move to the realm of technology and you bring in technological solutions that significantly bring that down, you're able to see much stronger and wider distribution, more financial inclusion, more access to financial services and products, which are necessary to a region that hosts a very large segment of population. You're looking at about 1.5 billion across the Middle East and Africa, and that's slated to grow towards 3 billion.
Well, I even heard 4 billion, so it's a growth area, isn't it?
It is a growth area, and if you look at it, if we want to go macro, you look at the population demographics, you have that youth bulge in the population pyramid.
Yeah.
And so as a youthful population, it is a growing population that is hungry and thirsty for technological innovation. Again, you want to draw a parallel? Look at telco in Africa.
Yeah.
They leapfrogged from non-existent landline penetration to immediately edge in 3G, it was at the time. And strong penetration at that, in terms of sort of that digital aspect. And if you look at where financial services are, if you look at where healthcare is, if you look at where education is, the solution will not be through traditional infrastructure. You will not build more hospitals, more schools, and more banks, but rather leverage and work with and collaborate with the leading technology providers to enable this.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, just there is something which you said, which is kind of a new, I guess, in terms of my thinking. It's like this notion that when you talk about the Middle East, you're actually then really including Africa as part of your kind of thinking. And is that something that is kind of particular to global ventures, or is that something which you think is more UAE or Saudi wide? Are people thinking in those broader terms? Because I completely agree. I mean, you've got a kind of very young population who are going to want access to products and services. And yeah, it's the first time I've really thought that actually what's going on in Dubai is that kind of broader picture. So again, I was just interested to kind of get your reactions to that.
This goes back to the days in which we started formulating our mandate, our first strategy. As global ventures, where do we want to allocate capital? Where are we going to invest? Where are we going to deploy? And to us, it wasn't a question of only the GCC or only the Middle East or broader MENA, which is the more common geographic segment, if you will. So basically Middle East and North Africa, i.e., where you have the majority of Arabic speakers or Arabic language speakers. The notion of introduction of also the rest of the continent of Africa for us was one, global ventures in its genesis is predicated on being able to connect and build bridges between countries and facilitate growth and expansion so that when you're looking at a total addressable market or a TAM as we refer to it, you're able to see ways in which you can expand, ways in which you can grow, and ways in which there are similar dynamics that you can capitalize on to allow for that seamless cross-border movement that technology allows. So technology is borderless. That's the beauty of it. And that's why as a VC, what we look at is how can we take that technology, scale it across borders and allow for that additional market to play. And when you start to look at the corridors that are being built between markets like the UAE and Saudi, the UAE and Egypt, Saudi and Egypt, you're starting to open up that sort of continent initially. And then you start to look at Egypt and Nigeria. There are similar trends. There are similar demographics. You're looking at 100 million people in Egypt, a few hundred million in Nigeria. You're starting to talk about very sizable populations that want to see that sort of cross-pollination in markets. We had one of our Nigerian portfolio companies, Helium Health, make an acquisition of a digital health company in Qatar to allow their first foray into the GCC. This was a couple of years ago. And so those corridors are starting to develop. They're starting to be built, and we believe exist and will continue to exist for a while. Because of these similar trends, because of the similar dynamics, yes, the macros may be starkly different between the GCC and a market like Nigeria, as an example, but the corridors do exist to facilitate and allow for that innovation to come into play and to cross-border.
I think it's a really fascinating thing to kind of think about. So going back to, I guess, the UAE and the focus on FinTech, and I think, there's a real focus I can see in the UAE on generative AI, but where isn't there a kind of focus? I go back to the point you made around kind of building blocks. It feels to me, as I sort of look in, that the building blocks are really being put in place. So I was keen again to get your perspective as to whether that's a right observation. And also it'd be interesting to get your views on, dare I say it, UAE versus Saudi Arabia as well, in terms of those building blocks. Because I guess, again, observation, I can see there is a degree of like healthy competition emerging between the two countries as they look at the kind of fintech space. So yeah, I was just kind of keen to get your views on that as well.
Sure. I'll start with your question on the building blocks and on AI. Personal view, AI is ubiquitous. It is not a sector. It transcends, it crosses, it goes all the way across any sector. It's an enabler, and it's a tool that will facilitate and enhance efficiency, the way in which we work, the way in which we interact. And so in terms of investment in AI, I think that is ubiquitous, and that is sort of still concurrent with the different sectors in which we deploy into. AI can be employed in fintech, AI can be employed in digital health, AI can be employed in education, and so on. And so that's to tackle the first part. The second element is what we've seen is a very progressive mindset towards the adoption of technology when it comes to different elements around fintech. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on digital assets specifically, but what I will say is the UAE was the first to launch regulation around digital assets with the launch of the Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority, VARA, chaired by the Director General of the Department of Economy and Tourism in Dubai, His Excellency Hilal Al-Mirri, which means that mindset has always been there to say, how do we facilitate and how do we enable infrastructure to attract the best? What this has allowed is a lot of the key players in the digital asset space, crypto and others, to see Dubai as a hub that they wanted to come to, that they wanted to be in, and it allowed for that migration of talent. Back to the early comment on Brainport, that is how you develop building blocks that will attract the best people to want to come and build here and be present here and position themselves, their families, their livelihoods here, and then scale from here globally. Because again, back to the notion of where we're located, super strategic on a global basis.
Sorry, just to jump in, I guess you then have, ADGM, which is a kind of more of a free port idea where it's easy if, like Dharmesh and I were attracted to the Brainport, it would be easy for us to kind of set up a company and
Dave, you've got the ADGM, you've got the DIFC, but you've also got the Central Bank of the UAE as the overarching regulator that is listening, that does have a dedicated fintech team, that does work collaboratively with all these companies to try and facilitate and enable a way in which that can come to fruition, come to existence. So the reality is it's all about the mindset. And the mindset is one of let's build rather than let's restrict. We have to maintain checks and balances, absolutely. And the regulator needs to play its regulatory role. But just listening and engaging and making sure that they are abreast and aware of everything that is coming in, how that can act as an enabler, how that can act as a mover and shaker, is enough to say that we're seeing very positive signs towards it. We've seen in our portfolio, fintechs in our portfolio get licensed by central banks across the region.
Sorry, a separate question, because my experience, I had to say, is very limited of the fintech market in that region. But more globally, we tend to see that, especially in the larger countries, fintechs tend to start off with a fairly local plan, as in to address the needs of the country, especially true in places like the US and the UK. More recently, we visited Lithuania, and it being a very small country, less than 3 million people, the fintechs there had a totally different mentality, which was basically, we can't just serve the local market. It's not big enough. We have to start with a global plan from the beginning. What is it like for fintechs there? Are they focused much more on the region than they are globally? And what's the progress with like unicorns in your region?
That's where we would have to unpack the fintech value chain or across our sort of segment, right? And go to sub-verticals. What I would say broadly is, depending on the market in which you're operating and depending on the service that you're providing and the total addressable market for that specific service that you're trying to provide, you can assess and decide whether you are working on an immediate market as a first step and then potentially launch into new markets, or whether you want to tackle a couple of markets simultaneously or in very quick succession. You touched on the notion of unicorns in the fintech space in the region. We are fortunate to have backed the region's first fintech unicorn, a buy now, pay later platform called Tabby. They were minted as a unicorn in Q4 of last year, where they raised an equity round, followed very quickly by a very sizable debt round as well to facilitate that sort of growth stage for that company. The business started in the UAE and very quickly launched Saudi thereafter, because it was a market that was underserved in terms of that segment. So specifically on the buy now, pay later side, it's something that we had seen in other markets globally, but the region had not seen a localized and nuanced version towards these markets. And so the launch in the UAE and Saudi was almost concurrent. It was very quick, and it allowed for the scalability to happen fairly efficiently and effectively. And so when you go back, it's back to that sort of, what are we unpacking specifically within that value chain? If you go into, for example, payments infrastructure, then I think that's going to be very different. You're going to have to take a slightly more nuanced approach where you're going to have to crack the use case, the technology that you're adopting. Why is it specific to a certain market? Get the regulatory approval, adoption, the partnerships that you need in place, and then try and replicate in other markets. Again, we have a portfolio company that has managed to successfully build its initial market, its initial presence, and its first sort of layer, if you will, in Egypt, and then successfully expanded to markets like the UAE, Oman, and Saudi Arabia, as well as Pakistan. Anecdotally, it's a company called PayMob. And working with regulators, working to get the right licensing. They were actually the first international fintech to be licensed by the Central Bank of Oman, just as an example and anecdotally. And so as you think through that as a payments infrastructure business, it's a little bit different as a business model, and it required a little bit more of a sequential approach, which they have done. And so to answer your question, there's no one size fits all. There's no cookie cutter approach. It is quite nuanced.
I mean, we've also seen a bit of a downturn in other markets, but you seem to have ridden the wave. Is that because maybe you started later, or what's keeping it alive much more than in other geographies at the moment? I mean, we've definitely seen the downturn on the tech side. There seems to be a return of some investment in the UK and the US, but we clearly had a dip, but you didn't, I don't think.
If your question is on a general basis, there was a little bit of a slowdown. There was a little bit of a slowdown. Let's be realistic. Let's be honest. But the reality is the market is more or less at an inflection point at the moment. If you look at the venture market in general across the Middle East and North Africa, 6 years ago, it was shy of $300 million. If you look at it last year, it was closer to $3 billion, which means that it was a 10x growth over the past 6 years, which is not insubstantial. Now, $3 billion is not, on an absolute basis, is not huge. But it is the movement directionally that we're seeing, which is very important. It is the development of that ecosystem. It is the emergence of the first unicorns. It is the emergence of second and third time founders. It is all the leading indicators that you would want to see in a technology or startup or venture ecosystem that point towards this, moving towards an inflection point. And so that is where we believe we are at the moment. And so there is significant interest. It is helping significantly as an ecosystem across economies. That is why you see the intent that you see from countries like the UAE and Saudi to really make sure that they do support and back and enable those ecosystems to grow and flourish, because they are creating jobs. They are creating economic growth. They are creating financial inclusion, access to healthcare, access to education.
True. From a talent perspective, what's being done to kind of really pull in the talent into the region? I mean, I've seen a good friend of ours, Atul Chowdhury, join STC, and then I see, there's going to be like more people moving over. But what's the draw, do you think, to fintechs, for people from here to go over there to go and work in a fintech? I was going to say.
It used to be the weather, but after last week, I'm not so sure. So.
I think it's more than the weather. I think let's go back to that brain port. Let's go back to the concept of brain port for a second. It's creating that excitement around an ecosystem that is at an inflection point that presents a lot of opportunity for development, for growth, for execution, and for success. And so it is those building blocks that are coming together, coupled with the infrastructural enablers and the building blocks that we alluded to earlier with Dave. I think those coming together are allowing for a more attractive sort of region, if you will. The other thing is, and if I'm honest, and I'll speak very openly here, if we go back to the crisis management that we saw around when COVID hit, what markets like or countries like the UAE were able to do and what they've delivered on shows such a progressive and sharp mentality towards how to maintain that growth trajectory, how to maintain that sort of resilience, and how you build that in and bring it into other elements of economy and society. And I think that was a key factor in attracting a lot of people, where they saw what was being done here. That was attractive to them. They came in. I personally know people that came here initially with the intention to be here on vacation for a week or two, and then sort of went back home, packed up their bags and moved here because they realized that there was something to be done. That, coupled with elements around remote work and the enablement of remote work, allowed people to experience life here a little bit more without having to do full disruption or full movement immediately. Soft commitment, and then ultimately a hard commitment and a move here. And so I think those coupled together as factors enabled that.
I mean, I also think you can't underestimate the energy as well. Like what you said about the airport is like the country set its mind to doing that, and that's what it's done. Again, it feels like around FinTech and cutting edge technology, the country set its mind to it. And, I'm really excited because Dharm and I will be in Dubai together in a couple of weeks' time at a FinTech conference. And I just want to see his face when he feels the energy kind of as you get off the plane. It's tangible. And who doesn't want to be in a place where the vibe is positive rather than, sometimes I guess it can feel like you're pushing water up a hill around, I guess, some of the other places in the world, not the UK, of course. But so I don't think you can underestimate that. One of the things I was keen to talk about was Saudi Arabia as well. And I don't know whether it's competition or not between UAE and Saudi Arabia, but there seems to be a real kind of interest in being a FinTech hub in KSA as well. One of the things I sense about KSA is that a real thirst for education. Like when you talk to them, what they're looking for is people to not just come and set up, but look at helping to educate the population around all of this. And whilst I think that is obviously very key to what's going on in the UAE, it's really pronounced in KSA. So again, I was kind of keen to get your views on any differences.
Saudi Arabia has, with full intent, been supporting and enabling the venture ecosystem and has provided the building blocks and the wireframes to allow for sectors like FinTech to thrive, whether it's through the sandbox environment, whether it's through the banks being progressive and realizing that we can work with FinTechs on last mile, on enabling through banking as a service, the relationship to allow for wider reach, for a more vast approach, understanding that you don't have to build everything in-house, but you can leverage external technology that's been built, purpose it properly, and get it out there in a collaborative way. We are seeing these wireframes. That, coupled with the top-down approach of Vision 2030 and everything that you're seeing in the kingdom, means that there is that drive for change, that drive for growth, that drive for scalability. But back to the earlier comment, do not underestimate the impact that this is having on jobs. Do not underestimate the impact that this is having on economy, even as far as potentially even percentage points on GDP. You are seeing that movement happening. FinTech does sit at the core of it because the financial sector is priority sector for the kingdom. And so naturally, you'll see FinTech taking a leading role there. What you're seeing is progressive thoughtfulness around open banking. You're seeing progressive thoughtfulness around the enablement of infrastructure to allow for payments, digital payments, etc. Everything that you would need is being considered, is being rolled out and being invested into. The most important thing is, I think, it is how those three work together and jive together.
It's really interesting. Unfortunately, we're kind of almost at time. I mean, I could genuinely chat to you all day, and I hope that when we make it to Dubai that we actually meet face to face.
I look forward to it.
But I guess I wanted to think about the future as well, like if you could project yourself 5 years into the future, what do you think the world of FinTech in GCC looks like?
By design, I'm an optimist, right? I'm a venture capitalist, so I am an optimist and a long-term optimist at that. And so I have to say, we see more progression happening. We see more happening on the infrastructure side, particularly the FinTech infrastructure side. We have published a full detailed report as Global Ventures, which you can find on our website, a report on FinTech across the Middle East and Africa. This is a recent publication, December of last year, so it's only 4 months old. Quite relevant data, which talks about sort of what we see as potential elements of the future of FinTech, how it can look like, how it'll shape out, what are the key themes or some of the key themes that we see playing out across that entire region in which we invest. And yeah, I mean, that's part and parcel of how we like to sort of operate. The thesis-driven or approach with the thought leadership around sectors is something that we've always been very keen on. The FinTech report I alluded to is the second FinTech report that we published. The first one was FinTech and MENA, published in 2019. And so if you go back and compare the differences, you will see that sort of first movement, that first shift, that first evolution. And we believe that there's a lot more to come because we are still at the early doors of the entire venture ecosystem, and FinTech definitely at the core of it.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm going to save them for when we meet in Dubai because I'm super excited to be going there. So I've learned a lot today, by the way. Thank you so much, Said. I mean, it's like an area that I've visited quite often. And actually, I've been really impressed at how quick the city's progressed. It seems to grow in size every visit I come. So I'm really looking forward to see how much it's grown since then.
Look forward to having you here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you for tuning in to Dave and Dharm Demystify. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe and tune in next time as we take another topic and demystify it.